Last year the Isle of Man was warmer and sunnier than it has been since records began, so why is Paul Craine MLC so worried? 2022 had 3 times more thunderstorms than usual but slightly less rain, so we're more likely to get flooding when it does rain, and only one of the past 25 years has been cooler than average. Mr Craine may be a bit of a statistics nerd, but he's concerned at these long-term trends. The Isle of Man is getting warmer and sunnier. That's got to be a good thing.
It sounds as if it has to be a good thing. Yes, the temperatures, the mean annual temperature in the Isle of Man, which is a temperature that's based, first of all, on the daily temperatures recorded, and then they're turned into the average for each month, and then you turn the averages of the months into this mean annual temperature. The mean annual temperature in 2022 was 11.14 degrees Celsius. Doesn't sound like a huge amount, because you're used to thinking, 20 degrees or something is a lovely hot day. But 11.14 is the highest temperature recorded, the highest annual temperature recorded in the Isle of Man since the Met Office opened. It opened in 1947 when the airport opened, but its first full year of records was 1948. So there's 75 years of continuous records, and this was the record year, beating 2014 by a small amount. But the bigger picture in this is not so much, there's 1 year it's been the hottest year. The bigger picture is that if you try to graph that in a very visually effective way, using what's known as climate warming stripes, developed at Reading University and now used the world over, you can see that if you take the average of the mid-30 years, because climate data is based on 30 years, if you take the average of the mid-30 years and then you compare all the last 75 years with that middle average, you can see how the temperature changes. If you colour the years that were colder than the average in blue, and darker blue for the more below average, and you colour in the years above average in red, darker red for the years above average, you end up with a graph which goes from blue back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, and it gradually shifts across to red. And over the last 10 years or so, there's 12 years, there's nothing in blue. It gets warmer and warmer, and you can see visually very clearly that the temperatures in the Isle of Man, recorded at Ronaldsway, have been rising and rising over that period. That's the sort of longer term picture.
The one thing that you could say about the colours on these sort of visualisations of the temperature change is the difference in changes to get from a red to a blue, or a blue to a red, as sadly as the direction we seem to be headed. That they're relatively small temperature changes, aren't they? And perhaps the strength of the colours indicates a much bigger change.
The colours try to make clear the change. I think if you didn't use greater distinction between the changes in temperature, it would disappear effectively. So the colours accentuate the change, perfectly accept that. But what we have got here is, in the first 30 years or so that the Met Office operated, if you take the 30-year period from 1951 through to 1980, the mean annual temperature of those 30 years was 9.45 degrees Celsius. The mean annual temperature of the 30 years from 1991 to 2020 was 10.41. So we've seen here, based on 30-year averages, a shift of almost 1 degree in just 75 years. Globally, the picture is running at 1.2 at the moment, 1.2 degrees rise. And that, again, sounds as if it's small. That's taken from 1880 usually, is the start date for that. So 1.2 degrees rise. And yeah, people say that's a tiny amount. If you then ask people, okay, and 15,000 years ago, the Isle of Man was under a kilometre of ice. How much colder was it then than it is now? The answer is it was 6 degrees cooler. And that doesn't sound like a huge amount either. We can have that variation within a day, 6 degrees. Temperature in the summer might rise from 15 to 21. 6 degrees cooler, but At 6 degrees cooler, it was enough to mean that at the end of a summer you still had some of last year's snow on the hills not melted, and if you've got some snow left and then there's more accumulation, if that accumulates over thousands of years, you get this change. 1.2 degrees is significant. It makes, that's running right around the planet, it makes the atmosphere of this planet more, it gives it higher energy, it gives it greater capacity for evaporation, therefore changes in rainfall patterns and so on. It tips the balance in communities that are suffering from variable rainfall, that it tips the balance into greater drought, it tips the balance of ecology, of what insects are thriving and what aren't, insects being found higher up hills than used to be and so on, disease-carrying insects. It changes all of that. It changes food production, it turns some areas of the earth into areas where it's more difficult to produce food. And the United Nations and the International Panel on Climate Change and so on, they're trying to peg this global increase at 1.5 degrees. That looks unlikely. It's the reality to it. If we hit a 2 degrees rise, we'll have lost all the warm water corals. They'll be gone. When you're getting above 2 degrees, then you're entering the area of feedback loops, and you really can't predict what's going to happen. If the permafrost melts and you get more methane in the atmosphere, how's that going to affect it? But of course, it's not the climate change is not just about warming. It's also about changes in sea temperature. It's about changes in the strength of wind, in the frequency of hurricanes, etc. There's a whole series of things in behind this. And what these stripes here show, getting back to the Isle of Man is part of this bigger picture. The changes here are not the result of our emissions, because the air that at Ronaldsway is what's passing over every day, so we're capturing the air masses that are moving over the Isle of Man, as well as local conditions like cloud and so on, which will affect this. But we're part of this global picture. And it is one that over the longer term is concerning. The biggest worry is that these changes, the best understanding is they're caused by increase in greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is still, the amount being put into the atmosphere is still rising, 165 million tonnes a day and rising, okay? And what goes into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide especially, stays there for between 300 and 1,000 years, so maybe up to 40 generations. So
you talk about 165 million tonnes a day, but how much of that is actually taken out by natural processes, by trees and plankton in the seas and all that?
Less than used to be is the reality to the trees because of the deforestation that's gone on. I couldn't give you a figure off the top of my head on that. Yes, clearly trees help that, but in parts of the Amazon, the removal of trees has been to the extent that the area is perhaps contributing more CO2 to the global atmosphere than it's removing at the moment.
You're listening to Paul Craine MLC. And it was quite, I was reading some research recently which indicated that actually the seas now are the biggest absorbers of carbon, not least in terms of acidification of the ocean, but also in terms of the photosynthesis that takes place primarily with plankton, phytoplankton that convert the carbon dioxide into oxygen. So the seas are really quite important to all this.
Yes,
and we tend to be worrying, particularly at the Isle of Man, we're worried about the temperature and how warm is it going to be, and do we need a coat or don't we need a coat or whatever. But actually the increases in temperatures in the sea have potentially double whammies here. Not only do they contain a means of reducing the amount of, or the impact of the carbon that we're releasing into the atmosphere, but there's also the energy contained in the ocean affects our weather, doesn't it?
It does, yes. Yes, the oceans in particular absorb some of the heat, but in doing so, that is leaving warmer oceans, although, again, we're not talking huge figures. Those who went bathing in the sea on New Year's Day or so, I'm sure would not be saying, oh, how warm the ocean is now. But these are, the oceans are warming up. That is increasing the frequency and severity of tornadoes, typhoons, a range of things. Typhoons, hurricanes, these are the same things, different names in different parts of the world. But the intensity of those is increasing. You can see how the language changes. I think back in the early 90s when there was hurricanes hitting Florida that were very high speed, I think it was only geography teachers who would have been able to describe the category of the hurricane using the Saffir-Simpson scale. It's a Category 4 hurricane, Category 5 hurricane. No one else was using that terminology, but now everybody sort of says, oh, it's a Category 5, and they have an understanding, even if they might not know that that's called the Saffir-Simpson scale. But these have increased. They're crucially based on temperatures of the sea in the top 80 meters or something, and it's the wind blowing over, sea temperatures of 26, 27 Celsius, that is the basis of hurricanes forming, So,
and of course, as we found in recent weeks, there's an awful lot more rain in the clouds, and it comes down a lot quicker.
They have, haven't they? The change is more to do with the intensity of the rain when it comes. I saw the Met Office down at Ronaldsway produced their summary for the year and talked about the fact that the rainfall was about 100 millimetres less than usual last year. But the sunshine was greater, an extra 6 hours, and the temperature, as I say, had hit this record. So the rainfall, certainly our experience of it in the Isle of Man, although we did have a period of drought conditions and hosepipe bans and so on last summer, the main rainfall impact that there's been is these really intense rainfall periods, and we saw that, as you say, earlier this week. We had some very intense rainfall with local flooding very quickly out around. I come in from into Douglas from Marown, and there was flooding down below the school, and Balhutchin Hill was at the worst I've seen it in 20 years of living out there, and then the Strang Road was flooded and so on. And very quickly this happened. This is quite new, this intense flooding, and then we've had some overtopping too so far this year at the sea. When we talk about sea temperature rising, the change in temperature is part of the reason for sea level rise. I think most people assume it's the melting ice, but when the sea's warmer, it expands thermally. So globally, the amount of sea level rise appears small. 22 centimetres is the sort of figures that I'm seeing. By the end of the century, expected to be 40 centimetres. So it's a change. But when you're getting lower pressures and stronger wind, if that comes onshore, then that extra 20 centimetres means the difference between limited overtopping and much greater overtopping. And that's why there's work going on around the island's coast and harbours and so on to put walls in place to protect against this. Because it's sea temperature change that's triggering this.
When you think of known temperatures, you way down to is it minus
273 or something?
Something like that. Right the way up to thousands and thousands of degrees centigrade. The overall scheme of things, this is a tiny fraction of a percentage of change in temperature. But of course, when you look at this in the livable zone, the zone in which the planet can allow us to exist as a species, it becomes a more significant amount, doesn't it?
It does. Those astronomers looking for exoplanets, etc., talk about planets in the Goldilocks zones where there could be life, because there could be liquid water, etc., etc. We're used to that as a norm here, but our planet has not always been like that. There have been times when it's much more frozen in the past than it is today, times when it's been much warmer than it is today, and these run on a number of cycles and a number of variables within that. But what's happening at the moment is not explained by any of those cycles, the so-called Milankovitch cycles, and it's not explained by those. The most obvious explanation of it is the change that's going on because of human activity. But you're right, we can't live in all parts of the planet. You couldn't produce food in all parts of the planet. Living in northern Greenland would be extremely problematic for you, in many other parts of the planet. Living in the desert areas would be impossible. So we do operate within quite a confined range, and I think it's narrower than most people think. People think of food production and they think, if it's warmer, the crops will grow faster. But once you're getting above about 36 degrees Celsius, most crops will have falling yields above that. So if temperatures are rising above that, the crops are in trouble, And
yes, and same with fisheries.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about fisheries from my former roles, but in warmer seas, fish tend to grow quicker. But of course, the acidification of the sea means that any gains from warmer seas are potentially going to be lost by the acidification.
Especially for shellfish. That's true. Of course, the bigger picture still than this is that climate change, even though we've looked at the range from air temperature, sea temperatures and so on, rainfall, that's only part of the bigger picture, because the bigger picture is that we've also got biodiversity loss. We've got losses of habitats, losses of species. Many scientific experts would describe this as being the sixth extinction because of what's going on here. The speed of decline of species matches the previous big five extinctions, the most famous of which is the one when the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million odd years ago. So we've got these other issues going on. We've got plastics getting everywhere, plastics in the ocean. Frightening study earlier this year of new mothers in England showed that 75% of the mothers had plastic in their breast milk, because of what they'd eaten. And so we've got this range of things going on which actually shout out the abuse that we have fostered on this planet. Really, it's extraordinary,
And knowing all this, to a fashion, it's a good thing that. Globally now, it's rare to find a politician who's not prepared to say, actually, we need to do something about this. But in a way, is that not more dangerous, the fact that the rhetoric and the language has changed to say, yes, we must do something about it, and yet still very little of great significance seems to be happening?
I would agree with that in a sense, if it becomes any slightly less alarmist, as it were, then people will begin to live with it, and settle back, I think that is a danger. It's been interesting in the last few weeks to see some sources. The big Operation Drawdown project in the United States was talking. I read something this week. They were talking about light at the end of the tunnel, in the sense that we may, before too long, reach the point where the carbon emissions are beginning to fall. Now that's not as good as it sounds, because so long as they still exist, we're adding to the carbon, and that's the problem. It lasts so long in the atmosphere that what we've created now is already going to be like that for up to 40 generations going down. So it's not just our children's children; it's way beyond that. Yes, there is some signs of that. We would be hoping the Isle of Man very late getting on board with addressing this, but we've got the Climate Change Act, and we've got our first 5-year plan under that Act, with attempts to reduce emissions across all sectors on the island. It's going to take time to build some momentum on that, but the hope would be that we begin to see the Isle of Man emissions clearly, measurably falling, and that's what we're looking towards.
And of course, with better leadership some years ago, we could have insulated ourselves, forgive the pun, from a lot of the problems that we're currently facing in relation to global energy prices. Yes. Had we embraced the opportunities that were available 5-10 years ago to better insulate our homes, to move to more sustainable energy production systems, we could have ridden this particular storm a lot better.
Yes, that's absolutely right. You know, if we'd had greater diversity of energy production instead of being so dependent on gas, but the position we're in now, we're still hoping to move to carbon neutral electricity production by 2030. You know, and that's coming quite soon. We're looking to see 35% reduction in emissions on the 2018 data. Revised slightly since to adjust that to make it more accurate. We're looking to see 35% reduction on that by 2030, and that's ambitious. That's it'll take a lot to achieve that, and that's where the work being done, as I say, on electricity production, on getting some onshore renewables, perhaps 20 megawatts by 2026 is built in there, but also seeing houses better insulated, you know, the sort of fabric first approach, and then looking at transport strategies developing and waste strategies developing and so on. So all of these areas, it'll not be solved by one of them. It's right across it. If you stop and think about it in terms of the scale of the social and technological change that's coming in these next 30 years as we move down to zero emissions, it's a very substantial change in our lifestyles. But the reality is we've been using, and my generation as bad as ever, we've been using hydrocarbons, burning them, manufacturing them into plastics and so on. We've been doing this for a considerable period of time, and with hindsight, it has not been a good technology. I know it's served us well. Some people point that out to me very strongly. Haven't we done well? Wouldn't we be behind where we are in terms of development if we hadn't had oil? Well, that may be true, but it doesn't mean to say it's been good for this planet by any means. You know.
And in essence, we have, as in the course of maybe 3 generations, caused an awful lot of the problems that many future generations are going to struggle to tackle. Are you confident that we're going to get somewhere with this? And sadly, it's going to be only a few seconds to answer.
Yes, I am. I think as time goes on, there'll be stronger and stronger feelings. I think the consultations that have been done show in particular that the younger the people are in the population, the more committed they are to the changes that have to take place. They're looking with a longer term view, and I think that's very powerful. I think to credit to many of the companies on the Isle of Man that have got their ESG principles, and they're committed to climate change. Some of them trying to hit carbon zero by 2030, which is pushing government really, because they're running ahead of the government picture, and that's great to see. But it's not universal yet, and we've got to carry people forwards. There will be costs to it, but there'll also be savings, and that's the crucial thing to see as we switch to heat pumps for our housing instead of fossil fuels. You know, the energy efficiency of some of these systems is absolutely amazing. You know, what you'll get out of your electricity multiplied, several times over from just using an electric fire. So the efficiency of these will be remarkable, and increasingly the experts are telling us that nearly all houses can benefit from a heat pump. You know, it doesn't have to have the most modern build styles and things like that. You know.
That was Paul Craine MLC. Adrian Cowan from the Met Office says it's interesting that, in line with expectations from international climate change models, many parts of the planet have seen some further extreme weather events, as well as new record-breaking climatic records for rainfall and/or temperatures across all seasons in 2022. Are you convinced by the statistics, or are you just happier that we appear to be having warmer, sunnier weather? Let me know your thoughts and views on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Gora Mayo. Thanks for listening.